That's my cue. I start. I need to start off and apologize. Rich, where are you? Still here? Oh, you're back there. Uh, Apparently, I didn't know I was supposed to shut off my mic during worship. And so I thought it was an opportunity to audition for the worship band. I don't think I passed because somebody came up and said, "Would you please turn off your mic?" It's maybe another time we can set that up. The other thing I want to say to you is normally I feel most comfortable when I'm in small groups, sitting in people's living rooms and talking and doing stuff. And occasionally I get to do public speaking like this. But normally it's like at weddings. You do it at a wedding. And I realized a long time ago, as somebody who officiates a wedding, no one comes to hear you talk. They're there for three things. They're there to see a bride walk down the aisle. They're there to see the first kiss. And they're there for somebody to announce and go, "Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, I announce to you." Other than that, they don't care. Anything you prepare and get ready. So I learned a long time ago. I script out. I don't stray off anything. I stick to the point. And some people say, like I've had fathers of the bride come like, "I love it. That wedding was done in 14 minutes." You do a good wedding. So I don't get that usually from females, but males are like, "Thanks for keeping that super short. Now I can get out of this tux or whatever." And the other time I get to speak is usually in Mexico. And sometimes Nate and I were talking about sometimes you're in another country, and you really do have to be prepared for anything. Because they'll look to you and go, "Oh, we have a visitor here, Brother Paul. Brother Paul, why don't you come up and preach a message today?" And you're like, okay. So Nathan and I were telling a long time ago, you kind of learn to keep a couple extra sermons, kind of like in your Bible, just in case. But normally when I have a chance to prepare, you gotta do it really differently because you have somebody translating for you. So if they want a 30 or 40-minute message, I only have to get like 15, 20 minutes ready because the translating covers up the rest of it. So it's just kind of nice. But again, I learned I have to script this because you'll deliver your piece. Those of you who have done translating, and you delivered your small piece, and if you go too far, they give you a death stare, like, "Stop. You gave me more than I can translate right now." So you learn to deliver these nice short segments, and if you're not careful, you start listening to them translate, and then they stop and you go, "Oh, that's back on me." And so you easily can lose your place in that. So I learned a long time ago, I stick to my notes, and that's most of my practice. So if you see me reference my notes, it's just, hey, it's what I get used to in this one. Thanks, Nathan, for the beautiful introduction, and appreciate it. And some of you are like, "So what's your connection here exactly?" I know as a church we've done some things with Shoulder to Shoulder, but my connection actually goes way back with just a really strong friendship that I've had with Joel over the years. And I'll share a little bit more about my story later, but there was a moment in life where I had this crisis that happened, and it was like the day after Thanksgiving. And Joel was already with his family spending that Thanksgiving holiday with his family in Cincinnati. And I sent him a text message that morning. He immediately got in his car, drove all the way back up just to spend that time with me, to be there and be available to me. And he spent those first couple days with me as I was going through that crisis. And I tell you, you don't forge a friendship stronger than that when somebody's willing to come and, "Yeah, I'm here for you, buddy. I'm not here to fix it. I'm not here to repair anything. I'm just here to be with you." And Joel was that person in that, and I will never ever forget him being able to do that. So a little bit who I am. I'm Paul Bassone, and I work as a missionary with Shoulder to Shoulder, which is based in Mexico, and Nathan kind of shared with you a little bit about it and how Shoulder to Shoulder exists to encourage and then to empower the local church, which happens to be in Mazatlan, which is in the west coast of Mexico. And they do a great job of partnering with those. When I first got to know them, they were only working with maybe 3 to 5 churches. Well, God has really blessed that ministry, and COVID actually gave new opportunities for them to minister, and they're currently partnering with over 27 churches throughout the Mazatlan area, encouraging pastors, setting up conferences for pastors to be more equipped at how to do outreach and be effective in their communities. And it's been amazing to see the opportunities and the growth that has happened because of that. So I know Community Church was like, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you guys sent a team down there and helped out actually with the very first widow home project they ever tried to do. And that was so appreciated that you guys were able to send that team down there, and they were effective, and they helped build a home for a widow. And it wasn't just building a home for a widow, but it encouraged that church, and it allowed them to increase their testimony in that community because of what you did. And we're super excited, and we're hoping that you'll be able to send another team sometime soon to come down there, because there are more homes that they have lined up that they would like to build for widows. Again, I work with Shoulder to Shoulder, and there are two primary roles. You go, so what do you do? Well, one, I'm really limited in my Spanish skills. Just being super honest. I was like, so what are you doing in Mexico? Well, most of the time, 70% of the time, I'm actually here in the States. So I have two primary roles, like I said. One of my roles is that I serve as a director of their summer internship program. So what we do is we invite young people to be able to come down and serve as interns throughout the summer. We have many teams that come down throughout the summer, and they're coming down for their 1 week or 8-day trip to come down, and that's their mission trip experience. And we use the interns to help facilitate that missions trip experience that these groups are coming down there. They'll work alongside the teams that come down. If they have Spanish skills, we'll use them to help translate. They will help with the construction projects. They'll help out a little bit in the kitchen. But my interns are meant to be there to serve the teams so that they, are empowered to be able to go out there. The teams go out and work well in the community with the churches in there. So I had my first batch of interns this past summer. I had 5 American interns, and I had 5 Mexican interns on there. And it was super fun to invest in them. And they did an awesome job throughout the summer. They worked really, really hard. So I'll put a bug out there for any of you that you think, man, that sounds like a lot of fun. Well, I'll ask this. If you are at least finishing up your junior year of high school, and that really interests you, like, man, I would love to spend a summer in Mexico and help serve in that way. I would love to talk to you about possibly coming down next summer and serving that. If you're not a junior yet, then kind of put it, and think of like, maybe that's something I could do in the future. It's like, cool, sign up for Spanish, learn as much Spanish as you can, because it really enhances your ability to do ministry and to help out in that capacity. So my one role is I'm the director of the internship program. And the second thing I do is I help facilitate the partnerships that we have with the churches here in the States. Shoulder to Shoulder has been really, really blessed by the fact that a lot of their partnerships actually happen here in Northeast Ohio. So there's Maranatha partners with them. You guys have sent teams down and partnered. And so I work with those churches as they get ready to send new teams down. It's like, how can we come alongside? How can we help you prepare your team so that they feel ready to come down? But I'm also always searching for new possible churches that may want to partner with them, because like I said, there's 27 churches that exist now that Shoulder to Shoulder is working with, and we could use churches here from the States that would love to come down, come alongside some of these churches, encourage them, work alongside them as they make an impact on the community that God has called them to. So, like I said, I hope you guys come down again, bring another team. We'd be excited to have you and host you up for that. I know I've talked with Joel, and he said, man, I would love to get another team. So hopefully here in 2022, you guys can come on down and help out with something and join in with there. So this morning, I was going to do a couple things. I'm going to share a little bit about my story, because sometimes you hear somebody who's like, oh, that person's a missionary, or they're a pastor, and there's certain images, and you think, well, that person must be like this, and they're probably super confident, and they're like these super Christians that got some serum that may be up in heaven. They kind of got the super Christian serum in them, and then they come out of the capsule, and they're amazing, and they have all the right Bible answers, and they know what to do, and they're super with God. They may pray like 8 hours a day, that kind of thing. And that's the image sometimes you get in there. And I thought, I want to take an opportunity to share a little bit about my story and where God's kind of brought me in there. And I want to do that for a couple reasons. One, I would like to encourage maybe even you and where you're at. And maybe some aspects of my story, you're going to say, man, I really relate with that. That's kind of me right now. And maybe that will be a source of encouragement, for you. Or maybe even a challenge for you in what you feel like God may want to be asking you to do in life. But the last thing I really want to happen is I want to give testimony to who our God is. I said I'm sharing my story, but really I'm sharing God's story and how he's working through me just as an individual. God is the one who does amazing things. It's not me, it's not Nathan, it's not Joel, because we have these titles. We have an amazing God who chooses to work with us in spite of some things. So we're going to actually look at a passage of 1 Corinthians, and we're going to kind of use that as our basis here. Do we have that on there? 1 Corinthians, that's cool. All right. So this was a passage for me that changed a lot of things in my life. So I'm going to read it right up here. It says, remember, dear brothers and sisters, that few of you were wise in the world's eyes, or powerful, or wealthy when God called you. Instead, God chose things the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. And he chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. As a result, no one can ever boast in the presence of God. Paul wrote this to the Corinthians, the church in Corinth, and he started off wanting to realize, hey, remember where you've come from. We came from this really humble background, actually. But remember, God still chose us, and he wanted to work us, and he did so for a grand purpose. And I remember the first time I read that, and I was in my mid-20s, and that passage grabbed me. And from that point on, I felt like God was putting me in a new trajectory. There was something different that I felt like God was going to do in and through my life from that point on. I'm going to share a little bit of prehistory with me. As I was growing up as a teenager, I was a dude that had a lot of fears. I had a lot of fears. I had feelings of inadequacy. I lacked a lot of confidence in things. I was not a big risk taker. I was scared to death I would be on stage or something would happen, or I'd be in a sporting event and I would be the object of failure and I would let my team down or I would look like an idiot. And so I made this very safe bubble for myself and said, let's just keep things safe here. Because I know I'm inadequate and I'm a failure and I don't want anybody else to find this out. So if I just keep this to myself and do it that way, maybe that's what I get. And there were certain labels I used to define myself even during that time. I felt like, man, I'm inadequate. I'm a guy with and I put those labels, and sometimes those labels were reinforced by people around me. I was in my junior year of high school, and I was attending a church, and it was a large youth group, and I remember my pastor came up to me, my youth pastor, and he pulled me aside. He says, hey, Paul, I just want you to know, I'm not going to disciple you because you know so-and-so and this guy and this guy and this guy. I was like, yeah, those guys are super awesome guys. Well, they're the clear-cut leaders, and in my estimation, you're a follower, and you probably will always be a follower, so I'm not going to disciple you. And I thought, well, it's my youth pastor. And I went, oh, okay. Because everything in my life said the same thing. It's like, yeah, I don't got it. There's nothing special about me. There's nothing, nothing about me that draws people to me. And I was like, okay. But that label really, it reinforced. And I go, okay, God, I love you. I'm going to still do what's right in life, and I'm following you, but I'm apparently not cut out to do much more in life when it comes to serving you. So I'm just going to stick to the background, just do the little behind-the-scene things, keep my nose out of anything leadership-wise, and that's where I'm going to be. And that was the labels I grew up with and what I believed and thought about myself. And as I went into college and, like I said, in my mid-20s, God started messing with me. He really started messing with me. Because I would read my Bible, and that passage that we read in 1 Corinthians, I read that and went, oh, wait a minute. So what you're saying, God, if I understand what Paul's writing here, what you're saying is he often chooses to use the most unlikely people to do the most unlikely thing at the most unlikely time in the most unlikely way. Because I had been reading a lot through the Bible, and I read all these people in the Old Testament and all these people in the New Testament. And once I started to get to know who they were, and I realized, why did God work through that person? Because, man, they had some inadequacies, and they had some shortcomings. But God worked through them. So I'm seeing this consistent pattern with you, God, that this is how you operate. These are the kind of people that you say, that's who I want on my team, and that's who I want to work with. And I remember as I read that, and it's just like this eye-opening moment, and I went, that's me. That's me. I'm that kind of guy. I feel like I don't have much to offer. I feel like there's nothing really here. God, is there a possibility, maybe a possibility that you want to use my life for something bigger than I had ever thought before? But at the same time, as I began to think those thoughts, I got scared. I was like, oh boy. But what if this assumption is wrong? What if I'm the one exception? God uses these other failures, but you're so bad, that I don't know if I can go into you in this one. And I was like, oh, I don't know, God. And God started messing with me. He started opening up these opportunities. He said, Paul, will you trust me? Will you walk in this direction? So I said I was reading through the Bible, and it was like, does the Bible back this assumption up that God uses the most unlikely people to do unlikely things? And I'm going to throw two examples out to you this morning. These are stories you know very well. The first one I'm going to throw is Moses. And when we read about Moses, we tend to think of, yeah, that's a great leader in the Bible. Obviously, he led the children of Israel, spent all that time with them. He's considered one of the great people throughout in the Old Testament. And it seemed like Moses was there because we know that he got pulled out of the river. He got raised in the house of Pharaoh, right? So he had the opportunity to be well educated. He was being groomed to be a leader within the Egyptian society. And so I think Moses had this great self-confidence to start off with. So we find out one day in Exodus that he's walking around, and he happens upon this circumstance where he sees an Egyptian slave owner. He's like beating the tar out of this Israelite slave, man. He's just going to town on him. And Moses steps in. And I don't know exactly how that confrontation goes down, but all we find out is that Moses ends up killing the Egyptian that was beating the Israelite. And you would think, hey, there's this rallying moment. Here's Moses. He's a fellow Israelite, and his people are being oppressed. And here's where the Israelites rally around him and say, Moses is our leader, and he will be our savior, and we're going to kick the Egyptians, and we're going to break the chains off. And ended up later, this one guy talks to Moses, this other Israelite, and says, who are you? Who are you? I saw you kill that guy. Who do you think? You think you're our leader now all of a sudden? And that shook up Moses because now the word was out what he did. And so the guy fled. He ran. He put as many miles as he could between Egypt, and he went out into the wilderness. Several chapters later, we're reading about Moses. He's older now, and he's in a land of obscurity. He's taken on this job as a shepherd. He's just a nobody out there just trying to live life, trying to leave his past behind him. He probably felt like a failure. It's like, man, I thought this is where my life was going, but here I am just raising sheep out in the middle of nowhere. Who was I to have these grandeur dreams of myself? And in that moment, Moses encounters God. He meets him in that burning bush and has this conversation with God, and God saying, hey, Moses, I want to use you to be that leader. that will bring my people out of Israel. And we know Moses put up quite the fight. It's like, no, you got the wrong guy. I tried that. Remember, I tried that. That failed pretty badly. Apparently, I'm not that guy. You better look for somebody else. And Moses did, he's like, hey, get my brother to do it. You got to send somebody else. And God was like, no, Moses, I want to use you. You feel like you've been a failure. You feel like you're inadequate. That's okay. I want to use you still. Does that sound familiar? Felt really familiar to me as I read through Moses' stories. Yeah, I feel that too. Those moments where we stepped out and we said, I'm going to take a step of faith. I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to teach here. I'm going to share my faith here. And it bombs and we go, okay, I'm done. I tried that. I'm apparently not the person cut out to do this. And yet God keeps going. I still want to use you. I'm not done with you. I want you to really trust me on this. So I felt like Moses is one of those characters for me. I kind of went, yeah, okay, God, you do use unlikely people to do what you want to do. Another group here I want to look at, the disciples. We see that they become these great church leaders, right, in the early church. They're awesome. There's Peter and John and James, and they go out and write their own books on top of that. And we think, man, that's who they are. But when you really read their stories through the Gospels are not flattering to them. I wrote down here some aspects of them. I said, even though they followed Jesus throughout his ministry, they proved to be anything but leaders. They're uneducated. They're lacking any social status. They have questionable backgrounds. One's a tax collector. Another two are these very anti-Roman zealots. So they have their own agenda that's going on in here. And we also see they have no religious training. You could actually argue, you think about them and read. There's also times that they argue amongst each other who's the greatest. These do not sound like winners of a guys that you want to build a new world movement upon. They're arguing amongst each other about and they would do it in front of Jesus, not once, not twice, but 3 different times throughout the Gospels. They do this. They're slow to understand the teachings of Jesus. They're lacking of faith. They deny children to have access to Jesus. There's nothing that says these guys are going to be awesome. If anything, you're looking and go, why? Why would Jesus choose? He probably had the pick of the litter throughout all of Israel, and this is what you come up with? We read in Matthew, Jesus actually went to the mountain and prayed before he made the decision. I'm going, you spent all that time praying, and this is the 12 you're going to work with here? How's that going to happen? How are you going to do this? Why would Jesus choose such a group? And why does he continue to work through the many men and the women that we see in the Bible? I wrote down there, I was thinking about that. God works through prostitutes. He worked through murderers. He worked through adulterers. He worked through liars, and he worked through cheaters. People with flawed character, flawed backgrounds, and flawed self-images. And yet God interacted with them. He worked in their flawed lives. Through these very same people, he advanced his grand plan to redeem mankind. And so we think about it even this morning. Does God still work that way? That way that he worked through Moses, the way he worked through disciples, the way he worked through Rahab, and the way he worked through David. And does God still operate in that capacity? And if so, what does that mean about my life? I watched God do that actually in my dad's life as a real life example to me. My dad was, he grew up in a very simple family. He was the middle child of 3 of an Italian home. So yeah, I got some Sicilian in me, which means if I don't know how to kill you, I know somebody that can. Actually, I don't. Maybe. And so my dad was growing up in this very simple way, and he got married and had us 4 kids. And there was something that was happening in my dad's life in his 20s, and my dad just felt like there's something there needs to be something more. My dad grew up a good Catholic. He knew the rights and the wrongs, and what does God expect of you and what the morals should be. And he knew how to operate. He knew this basic information about God and Jesus. But yet something was missing out of all that. My dad was on this search in his 20s to say, what is that? What is that? And I'm really grateful. There was a couple that came into my mom and dad's life, and they were with the Navigators. And they began to introduce my dad and said, what you're looking for is this life-giving relationship with Jesus. That God doesn't want just a set of moral standards out of you, but God wants to have this intimate relationship with you, and he wants to work in your life, and then he wants to utilize you to make an impact in your world. And that really gripped my dad. And he made a decision. I was 6 years old at the time, but my dad said, that's what I need. That's what I'm looking for. And it put my dad on this course of life that said, I want to get to know and to love this God more and more and more. One of my favorite memories, I grew up and I was the oldest of, I had two other brothers, and I had that moment where three boys are sharing one room. There's no room big enough to put three boys. Some of you grew up in that way. And so eventually my dad built a room in the basement for me, and I thought, oh, this is awesome. So at 14, I got to go live in the basement for several years. But every morning when I would come upstairs for breakfast and on my way to school, I knew I would find my dad at the kitchen table with his Bible open, reading and praying. My dad did that almost every single day. I could count on that. All of us as his children remember that's what we saw with my dad, this appetite and this hunger to know and to love God. He became involved in the church. My parents found a church. They felt like, yeah, this is the church we want to start being plugged into. And my dad got super involved there, and that church began to really disciple him, and he had opportunities to serve while they were attending there. I wrote this down, though Dad was simple and never educated past high school, my dad began to impact hundreds of people around him. And I saw that his impact was widespread and significant, and yet quiet and seemingly uneventful. My dad loved and he served people wherever he was. And in that way, God used my dad to demonstrate the heart and the character of God in a very living way to people around him. My dad went home to be with Jesus this past February. His death certificate says COVID, but I don't look at it as COVID took my dad. God said, it's time for you to come home, and I have a great reward for you in that. I remember at the ceremony, and like I said, this past February, and you were like, it's COVID. How many people are going to come? You know, a lot of people are living in fear, and so as a family, we weren't sure how many people were going to show up, and just well over 100 people. The church gave us a room for 75, and there was probably double that amount that came. And being in that receiving line and hearing stories about my dad, about how my dad impacted people at work. Carl, I know you worked with my dad at B&W, and I had man after man come up that my dad had been retired 15, 20 years, and yet these guys wanted to come and pay honor and say, your dad was a huge impact in my life at B&W. People that served my dad. My dad was an usher for several years and later became a head usher, and I had man after man come up and says, your dad, I loved him. He treated me so well. He prayed with me. He encouraged me. Man after man came up. This simple guy. My dad wasn't a profound speaker. He didn't have charisma or something like that. He just simply went out and loved and served people. And they came by the droves to a ceremony to say, that man showed me who Jesus is. That man showed me the heart and the character of God. I was amazed, and even the weeks after, I would run into people. I would take Mom, and my mom's present here this morning too. Super glad to have her. I had to bring my own cheering crowd. I would take my mom to the pharmacy where they would get their prescription filled, and I went in, and I said, yeah, I have a prescription here for Barbara Brasson. And they said, oh, you must be Benjamin's son. Let me tell you about your dad and how it's just farm people at the pharmacy. Your dad was one of the kindest people. Loved him, and he was so cheerful. And it's like, my dad's having an impact on people at a pharmacy. A couple weeks later, I took Mom to a dentist appointment. It was where you had to drop them off. They didn't let me go into the waiting room waiting, so I just sat in the car. I was just going to read for a little bit. And all of a sudden, this woman came out and came over to my car, so I rolled down my window. She goes, yeah, I'm just one of the workers here at the dentist's office. I want to tell you how amazing your dad is. I was like, Dad, I mean, this is somebody you may only see once or twice a year, and you're impacting them. My dad may have never felt like he had that much to offer, but God used him to impact people's lives. Just through the simple act of loving and serving people. And I saw that as such a model. I wrote there and I said, this quiet, high school educated man with no assuming leadership skills or discernible talents or skills. He was an instrument of God, demonstrating and leading people to the heart and the character of God. I started telling you a little bit about my story, that I was this young man full of these fears of failing and inadequacies, and I felt ungifted for anything profound. And I told you what my youth leader had said, and like I said, God began really messing with me throughout my 20s and 30s. And I took that 1 Corinthians passage and I saw the examples throughout the Old and New Testament. And I said, okay, God, I'm willing to trust you on this. I personally don't feel I got much to offer. But I'm willing to trust you and go and do whatever you ask me to do. I want you to lead and direct me. And I'll admit, I had my doubts. I went into this like I'm ready to bail. As soon as this looks like it's going bad, I'm out of here on this one. So I went into this slowly, and God started opening up more and more opportunities for me to be in positions of leading. Nathan mentioned I got to meet him as he was a young 5th and 6th grader. Between him and his brother, it was the only two people under the age of 17 that watched David Letterman and understood it. So he's really so I had the chance to work with young men like that and to invest in their lives, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Am I a discipler? I don't know. And I would have these guys over my house, and we started talking and sharing life and trying to be very real, not just about, hey, let's memorize and do this, and those are good things, but where does God really intersect in the realities of life and relationships and my relationship with my parents or with girls or anything like that? And we just really started dialogue and talking. And then God opened up other opportunities for us to do missions trip, and got to do two trips early on with Nathan. Seth also got to do a couple trips with Seth. I was thinking this morning, Seth, about there was a home that Seth and I got to go to 2 years in a row, this family, and they were very kind-hearted. They had a very simple home. In fact, when we came, it was me, you, and Doug Walker, and the parents gave us their room, and the parents moved in with their 2 sons. That's how giving and hospitable, not hostile, hospitable that they are, that they were for us. And so we were there, and it was a hot house. I remember that too. It was like there was no shade. The sun just baked down on that house and heated it up like nobody's business. And but I remember this one time Seth and I were sitting in the room. Doug was somewhere else, and their oldest son, Ilario, came in. And Seth knew a tad bit of Spanish. Tad. Tad may be an overkill on this one. And Ilario knew no English. But Seth liked him because he had a Jerome Bettis jersey on, so he thought, this guy's got to be cool. And so then the guy came in, and on the dresser right there was Doug's antiperspirant. It was one of those roll-on with the gel kind in there. And Ilario looks down at it, and as he points to him, we're like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. When you don't know each other's language, there's a lot of miming. And so Ilario, and next thing we know, he takes the cap off, and he's pointing at us. We're like, the guy rolls him up, gets a little thing on there, took his finger, wiped across it, and we're like, where's this going exactly? But we're smiling, like, hey, it's not mine. It's Doug's. I don't care. And then next thing you know, he's kind of putting his hands like this, and then he started pressing it. I mean, I remember us looking at each other like, are you going to tell Doug? I'm not going to tell him on this one. Like, but having the chance to go on these trips, and God was using those, and at first I went along as an assistant, and then God gave me other opportunities where I was actually leading some of the mission trips. And I was like, God, you're taking me places I wasn't planning on going 10 years ago. Not just in location, but in these roles and in these positions. And I was like, I'm still not sold that I'm your guy. But if you keep opening up these doors, if you keep saying, go here, I'm going to go. That's what I finally made up my mind. I'm either going to trust you or not trust you on this one. I said, I'm going to keep trusting. And I got to admit something. Many times I felt like, and I shared this with just a couple weeks ago, I was in a retreat in Mexico with the other staff members with shoulder to shoulder, and we were all sharing our stories. And I told my teammates, I said, I don't know why, but I feel like there's this theme, like I'm always the donkey amongst racehorses. Like why? I look at myself and I'm going, okay, I'm a donkey, racehorse, racehorse, racehorse. One of these things is not like the others. And I'm going, I'm thinking about what am I doing here? And the racehorses are turning around looking like, what are you doing here? Like, I don't know either. All I know is God said, show up. So here I am. And I feel like that's been a theme for me. And so God started building this more and more into my life. And I began to trust him more and more about what he wanted to do and where he wanted to take me and in what capacity he had laid out for me. Remember, I was this kid, and I don't think I ever outgrew this kid that felt inadequate and felt like I didn't have the skill set to do X, Y, and Z. God, you gave those gifts to so-and-so and so-and-so, not me. That's the kid, and that kid still exists here. But I'm learning what does it mean to trust him more and more about where he wants to go and what he wants to do in my life. I've excluded, for shortness of time here, there's a lot of other things God did. I spent 14 years helping to lead and be a part of teens and young adults' life, and I loved every bit of it. I loved every bit of it. And I've been pleased to see what God has done with that little bit of effort I put into it. And it wasn't me. It was God working through me to impact lives. And to see Nathan as a pastor, to see somebody like Jason Bradshaw, who's pastoring a church now in Troy, Ohio, and the number of young men and women who are faithfully serving, like the Mitchells here, faithfully serving in churches and helping lead and being a part. I'm really blessed that I got to be a part of that. Again, it wasn't because of me. It was a God far more powerful working through me. And I started to trust God more and more. And like I said, I left out a lot of details. I didn't put in there about my wife's journey through 7.5-year journey with cancer and her eventual, passing away. And that's why Joel had come up. He came up that morning that my wife had passed away. And that was a hard thing to navigate. I was like, okay, it was super great. God gave me a partner, and now she was really equipped. She was something else. And I was like, cool, I got a strong person to work alongside me. It gave me confidence, and I lost that person. You're like, okay, this is me again. Does this mean you're done? Do I go back, fade away? Or do you still have time and a place for me? There was even painful experiences in ministry that had some ups and downs, but through it all, again and again, I wrote this down here. I said, God has been gentle, he's been persistent, he's been faithful and steady, and he meets me in my inadequacies and my fears. I thought somewhere along the line, God would kind of take those things away. It's like a magic wand. Praying, I don't know why magic wands makes praying. I thought there was this magic wand that would transform my life, and no more inadequacies and no more fears. They're still there. But God's always been patient, and he walks through that with me. You may ask, hey, isn't this just a story about God helping you see and work for your potential? And you could look at it that way. I mean, some of you are coaches, or maybe you're a teacher, or you're a parent, and you work with young people, and you say, hey, I want you to see your full potential, right? And so, I see something in you. You may not see it in yourself yet. I'm going to work with you, and we're going to work hard, and you can reach this potential. And we think, isn't that how God operates? I'm not talking about something like that, reach your full potential. I'm talking about Jesus coming to your life and doing something impossible. The Gospels record this opportunity. We know John the Baptist came on, and he did this great job of pointing people to Jesus, and they were like baptizing people and say, hey, you need to get ready. There's somebody amazing that's going to show up, and you got to make yourselves ready for him. And so he was super faithful in proclaiming who Jesus was going to be. And then once Jesus showed up, John stepped out of it and goes, okay, I must decrease, he must increase, boom. Next thing we know, John's in prison. Okay, he had some run-ins with the local powers there, and so they had put him in prison. And so John's kind of trying to get news, like what's going on out there. And so he would have a couple guys that would come and share with them what's going on out with the people, being word on the street out there. And he started having some doubts, and he actually called a couple guys over and said, hey, do me a favor. Would you go out and find Jesus and ask him, are you the one we should be expecting? Are you really the Messiah, and are you the Christ? And so these two dudes, they came and they found Jesus, said, hey, word from John the Baptist, he has a couple questions, if you don't mind. And so they shared, hey, are you the one we should be expecting? John really wants to know. It's interesting what Jesus says to him. He says, tell John this. Tell him that the crippled, you got their legs back. Tell John those who were blind, they've received their sight. Tell John people who had leprosy, they're not lepers anymore. Tell John the dead have been raised. Some of them, it's like, tell John Jesus, the Messiah has shown up. See, Jesus didn't step into the life of a leper or a blind person or a dead person. It's like, hey, I'm going to help you reach your full potential. No, they're sick. There's no full potential with a cripple. There's no full potential. Jesus showed up into their lives and said, I'm going to heal you and restore you. I'm going to do what is impossible. Tell John the impossible is happening. Because when Jesus shows up in a life and we're willing to trust him on that level, this isn't about potential anymore. This is about Jesus stepping in and saying, I want to do the impossible in your life, and I want to do the impossible through your life. I wrote here in my notes that Jesus, he takes the broken, he takes the inadequate, he takes the overlooked, he takes the disregarded, he takes those who are flawed. And he loves them, and he does the impossible through them. That's what I want to share about my story. This isn't about me reaching a potential and I get to be a missionary now. My testimony is to share that God took this scared kid who really doesn't have that much in a skill set and said, if you're willing to trust me, I will put the words in your mouth as you need them. I will help you have insight. I will take a 50-some-year-old guy and you'll work with 20-year-olds and they'll actually accept you. I still am amazed by this, that God gives me a platform with 20-year-olds. I don't like any of their music. I've never seen a Game of Thrones. I've never seen a Harry Potter movie. There's nothing that they like that I'm still an old classic rock, Lord of the Rings, Marvel nerd, So, and so there's nothing there that says I should have an impact in a way. But God, I don't know how. But I have 20-year-olds that, I got one, Michael, is back here with my mom, and he's been living with me for 5 years. And maybe it's because I give him a place to stay. But we have great conversations, and I value that he lets me speak into his life as much as I allow him to speak into my life. That shouldn't be. Logically, all I know is God shows up and he says, go here. Okay, this donkey's going here. I'm going to show up and be where you want me to be. And that's the testimony I want to give, not to myself, but it's a testimony to this God. I'm going to ask the band if you want to start coming up and get settled in. And I'm going to throw a few questions that I want to put before you, that I want you to really ponder and think about as we close out here. The first question I want you to think through is this: who or what defines me? Who or what defines me? We often choose to be defined by people. We choose to be defined by life events or maybe even our own personal ambitions. And so we come to this definition, we'll say, I'm a failure, or maybe I need to do these things in order to be loved and accepted. Or you think, I'm a divorcee, that's my label. Or I need a boyfriend or a girlfriend to feel significant. Or maybe you think to this label, I'm somebody as long as I continue to perform well academically, athletically, at work, or in my family. The problem with these identities is that they're flawed. They're either based on lies, or they'll be in jeopardy as soon as circumstances change the landscape of my life. You and I were created and defined by God. You and I were created and defined by God. As a son or daughter loved by the Father, rescued by the Son, and empowered by the Spirit. You see, when you and I are defined by God, it is based in truth and it doesn't change, even at my worst. So I want you to think through the question, who or what defines me? And the second one you can read up there says this: what would it look like to trust God and allow him to direct me? I wrote here, and men and women in the Bible were changed when they made the choice to trust God and allowed him to direct their lives in radical ways. And oftentimes, the God ask is huge. The God ask is huge, and it shakes us up. God says, go build an ark, or lead my people, follow me, leave your country, leave your job, leave your family. God did that throughout scriptures, and he still does the big ask in the life of you and I. Maybe he's asking this out of you: share Jesus with your coworker. Maybe it's asking that hurting student that you're with next to in class if you could pray for him right now. Maybe it's helping disciple middle schoolers, or to live sacrificially so that you could give generously, or maybe it's become a missionary. And the pushbacks are real. Because we hear those things, oh, it's a big ask, God. And we have a pushback, and that's real. I'm scared. I'm inadequate. I'm flawed. Isn't there a better person? But what if this happens, and what if that happens? It's in these real life circumstances that I believe Jesus shows up. So the real question is this: do I trust Jesus to show up and do the impossible? Let me pray for us. God, I pray that we might find this out. Jesus, would you speak into our hearts? Would you help us to be honest? Help our unbelief. would you please show up in our lives? In Christ's name we pray. Amen.